Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to another Walking Dead video. So I actually wanted to review and break down episode 10 of season 5 of The Walking Dead. So the episode's titled Them. Really incredible episode, and I just kind of picked this episode randomly. There wasn't anything about this episode that I was like, oh, I'm just gonna go back and watch this moment specifically, because I want to go back and rewatch older episodes, and I don't want to go back to certain moments that I specifically remember, like, you know, iconic episodes. Like if I happen to watch an episode, then I'll do a review or breakdown of that episode, but I want to just pick episodes randomly because there's a lot of moments that happened before, very iconic moments that I think a lot of people have forgotten about, and watching this episode, there are so many scenes that I really did just forget about. So if you do want to get more breakdowns like this, definitely make sure to be a subscriber. I'm going to be going through this a lot because I'm going to really focus on this a lot over the next month, because we have one more month until Comic-Con, and that's where we're going to get a bunch of new details regarding just a lot of things with The Walking Dead, right? All the spinoffs and all that. And at that point, the promotion for Daryl Dixon season 2 is going to be insane, right? Who knows what other announcements they can make, but you know, starting from Comic-Con up until Daryl Dixon's premiere, which is like 8 weeks, there's going to be a lot of promotion, especially those last like 3-4 weeks, right? So I figured now is the perfect time to do this. So I want to talk about season 10 episode 5 titled Them. This episode, you know, going into it, because I haven't watched a lot of the previous episodes in a while, I had to kind of guess where the story was overall. And there were certain moments where I was like, all right, so this just happened beforehand. All right, so that happened just beforehand. And we see Maggie mourning the death of Beth, right? And I totally forgot a lot of these scenes like existed. And that's the thing. I remember a lot of the major moments, and I remember just little details here and there, you know, over the last however long. But a lot of these scenes I have just totally forgotten have like ever existed. And honestly, going back to rewatch a lot of this, it really did kind of feel like a brand new show. And seeing Maggie mourn the death of Beth, it was just like, I literally, like, all these scenes here, I never knew existed, or at least I forgot existed. Like it was just, and there's actually some scenes from later on after the storm happens, and you know, we see the trees down and whatnot, and the walkers are all dead. Other than that makes no sense, but you know what I mean? That was all brand new to me. I don't remember that at all. The sounds of the woods, I miss that a lot. I really do miss the sounds of the woods, and this episode really was the ultimate survival episode. I like, maybe going back and rewatching it, I'll find another episode, but as of right now, this was really the episode where it was like, this is about survival, and like, should I just give up, right? Like, it's so hard out here in this world. Should I just give up? Because it's really hard to live in this world. Like, it really is, and it's just constant pain happening all the time with like these little moments of hope, right? But it's always just pain, and that's the theme of this episode, is really like, how long can I survive for in this world? Like, pushing yourself to the limit, and just like, can I do this? But the sound of the woods and like the crickets and all of that, like, I really do miss that, and I know they try to stay away from that now, but I want them to go back to that at some point. Like, I know that is something that people complain about, which is hilarious because it's been a while since they've been out in the woods, right? Like, it's actually been quite a while. Like, people complained about that so much around like season 8. Season 9, they were in the woods and whatnot, but they started to get away from that a little bit more, especially in season 10. Like, yes, the setting was the woods, but the focus on survival in the woods, and just like how there was really nothing around. They were just in the woods, and like, there's literally nothing around. That they started to not focus on anymore. And I think a lot of the focus was more on, we need to make these characters have, you know, just, I guess, more exciting environments. And that's why we got all the big stories that we've gotten. But honestly, going back to this, I really did miss it. And Andrew Lincoln and Scott Gimple talking about going back to simplistic survival horror, you know, for like the next whatever stories and all of that, I think is something that I really do want to see. Or at least Andrew Lincoln was like asked, like, you know, if you could sort of direct, you know, where Rick would go next, or what you would like to see, you know, happen to him next, right? It was something like that anyways, but he just responded like he would like to go back to that simplistic survival horror, just bringing everything down to the basics. So I like that. Gimple saying he wants to tell classic Walking Dead stories, but they are having a hard time trying to find anything just in terms of trying to survive. There's no water anywhere. Like, food and stuff, yeah, in this episode there is a moment where they do kind of find food, I guess, but water is something that they just cannot find anywhere. And they're hoping it's going to rain. They're having a hard time to sort of, I mean, they're waiting for the rain, right? And Sasha at one point actually finds frogs and buries them. A lot of that I think is because of Tyrese's death. Like, I totally forgot those were two big moments that just happened. There was Beth's death, which obviously was really big for our characters, and then Tyrese's death, which was like that episode. That's one I do have to go back and rewatch because that episode was so mind blowing. The classic Walking Dead theme song, oh, so cool to see. I'll always love that. Rick actually goes to Daryl and is like, I know you lost something back there, and he's trying to be there for Daryl, but Daryl just ignores it, and he's like, she's hungry, like referencing Judith there. And Daryl in this episode, like Daryl, Sasha, and Maggie specifically, the episode starts off with those three characters in the very beginning. And I feel like they were sort of the center of the episode, right? Like I think the major storylines in terms of how they felt overall focused on those three characters specifically. They're also just so dirty. Like they're all covered in mud. It's just, I think that's one of the aspects of The Walking Dead that a lot of us do miss, because everyone nowadays, like they're not necessarily like clean, but they look clean, right? Like no one looks as dirty as they did back then. And maybe it's because of the way that they were surviving back then, but I don't know. I think you could go back to that. Like you do have to find a way in making it like, these characters are trying to survive. Like Daryl Dixon actually did a really good job with that in season one of The Walking Dead, Daryl Dixon, because we see Daryl trying to survive in France and he's literally covered in mud and he's trying to find water everywhere and he's having a hard time trying to survive and he's just looking around for stuff. Obviously it's a very short scene, like it's not like the whole theme of the season, but that was still really cool to see because Daryl was now put in a place where he's having a hard time trying to survive now. And speaking of Daryl, Carol actually goes and follows him in a scene here. And I thought that was cool because like Daryl and Carol's relationship is obviously very special. And seeing the scene here where Daryl's just like, he just kind of takes off and Carol's like, well, I'm going to follow you. And Daryl's like, no, or whatever. But Carol's just like, she basically laughs and is just like, oh, enough, right? Just like goes and follows Daryl. Gabriel offers Maggie the chance to talk about like Herschel and Beth. And Gabriel at this point, I think is trying to help, but also trying to find some, I guess, reason to sort of, believe in his faith and whatnot and just have faith. And Maggie just kind of is like, nah, I don't want to talk about it or whatever. She's very upset, very angry with Gabriel in general. I mean, Gabriel at this point is a very new character. You got to remember that. I mean, he has both of his eyes. Like, that is one thing that I was actually kind of surprised by. Like, it took a little bit to get used to because I'm so used to Gabriel, like with the missing eye, or not, it's not missing, but like his one eye is blind. Sasha, like I said, is dealing with the loss of Tyrese, and she says in this episode that we are not the same, like her and Tyrese. And there's the whole back and forth between her and Michonne. And honestly, looking back at this now, I can definitely see why people got frustrated with Sasha. Like watching this scene, it was like you just kind of get a little upset about the fact that she's almost causing the deaths of everyone here. Like Michonne's getting so upset with her here because she's like, Sasha's just getting mad about this and that or whatever. And then when they all decide to take out the walkers that were following them, like they're all throwing the walkers into the bridge or whatever, Sasha just gets upset and just starts to like stab walkers. And Rick and everyone else has to like obviously start killing the walkers as well because now they're all starting to like rush them. Before they were all acting like walkers, basically just walking very slow and then would just like push them at the very last second. And so doing this here, Rick almost got bit. Daryl had to save his life. Michonne just got really upset and got like really mad at her. So I could see just in general around this point here, people, I remember that back in the day, people got very frustrated with her because it was just her making decisions that it was putting the group at risk. Carol tells Daryl that you're not dead, which was a reference to when Beth said that, I believe, or at least Carol said that. So she wants Daryl to just start, being himself, just to start living, just to start, and Daryl obviously, like, he takes that advice, and I really like the way the dialogue is done. Like, it's very similar to the way that the dialogue is done now in the spinoffs. It's just like very meaningful dialogue. I think the dialogue that became very like, philosophical and all that in like season 7 and 8, that wasn't there yet. It was like earlier on around this point, and I know Gimple was the showrunner here, but at this point here, it wasn't necessarily there. Like, the dialogue all feels very meaningful. Everyone is really listening, and you really focus on every single word. It's just the way the scene plays out. There's a lot of like long pauses in between, characters speaking. Maggie finds a walker tied up in a trunk. I'm wondering what happened there. I really like that about The Walking Dead, and they still do that to this day, where like you'll see a walker, and the walker will be in a really interesting situation, and you're just like, what happened there? Like, what's the story there? Because there's always a story there, right? So yeah, Maggie finds his walker, feels really bad, but can't put the walker down. And then Glenn shows up and is like, well, I'll do that, right? And helps Maggie out there. And it just made me like, man, I want Glenn to be back in some way. I wish there was a way to see Glenn on The Walking Dead. Like, it really is. It's one of those things that's like, we'll never get that. I mean, I think there's a way that Glenn could show up again in like a hallucination scene or just some sort of ending scene or whatever on The Walking Dead. I think, though, it would have to take, like, I'm just looking at Stephen Yeun and, like, you know, him coming back to actually do a part like that. I think it would have to take the end of Maggie's story for something like that to actually happen. Like, if Maggie was about to die, or if it was like her very final episode and they jumped forward in time 20, 30 years and we see her much older or whatever, I could see there being some sort of scene where Glenn is involved in some way. It's a hallucination scene, a dream sequence, or something like that. Like, I think that is a way that could actually happen, but they can't find any supplies at all. And that's the focus of this episode, is just trying to survive. And I love that you just see the characters walking, and it's just like, that heat is just like, it's brutal, you know, and they're having a hard time just trying to, you know, that they can't find water anywhere. And then dogs show up, which I totally forgot this even happened, because I thought like the first like zombie dogs, I mean, I know they're not zombie dogs, but they're just like really hungry dogs. I thought the first time that happened was in season 9 with Negan, when Negan was in that place, whatever, and that one dog shows up. Yeah, he has to obviously run away and all that. So seeing this here, I was like, oh, whoa, I don't remember this. And then, Sasha takes care of all of them. And, you know, at this point I was like, well, you know, that was a really scary situation for them. And they actually ate the dog meat, which I was just like, wait, what? Like, I remember this being a thing. I do remember, but I just forgot about it. I was like, okay, so that's why that happened. Noah, very cool to see him. He was very concerned that he wasn't going to make it. He's watching everyone survive here. And yes, it does seem really hard. And he sees that they're struggling. But for him personally, he's just like, I don't know if I'm going to survive. And then Sasha's just like, yeah, then you won't. And like, Sasha is like, I do like her mentality here, because that is something that you do need to tell someone like Noah in that situation, because you want to make him stronger. Like, she's saying that because she cares. Like, she's not saying that just to be rude, right? Like, she's saying it because she cares, and she needs to, you know, like, that. I think that's the best thing that Noah could have heard in that moment. Like, you need to believe that you can survive. You will have a chance. Like, maybe you won't, but you will have a chance. But if you believe that you're not going to survive, then you absolutely won't. And I think that line was definitely something that I feel like is for sure inspirational. Maggie as well, at this point, she's wanting to give up, and then Glenn's like pushing her to keep fighting. Daryl, he's in a lot of pain, and he's feeling really guilty about Beth. And if you remember back then, like, he was trying to keep Beth alive, and they had that really special moment early on in the season and all that. So there was a lot there that I think Daryl feels overall just responsible for. And, you know, I'm sure Merle, he's starting to feel upset about that. Just a lot of things there, because we never really saw Daryl. I mean, I guess we did see him break down in season 3, but we haven't seen him break down a lot. And so he actually goes and sits by this tree, you know, just looks at this barn or whatever, and he just breaks down. He's just crying and crying and crying. And then he just comes back, and then they find a sign that says, "From a friend," with a lot of water bottles. And so everyone's just like, wait, they're all contemplating, like, should we drink this or whatever? Like, I think most of them were just like, no, we're not going to drink that. But this was like a major problem. Like, they could drink that, and they probably, like, I feel like they probably were going to. They were going to be forced to eventually drink that water. And it would have been cool if the episode focused a lot more on that. Like, should we drink this water? Do we trust who dropped that water off here? I feel like that would have been a really interesting, just like, you know, experiment with the characters. Like, who would give up first? Like, I feel like out of everyone, Daryl would definitely be the one that would never drink the water. Like, I really don't think he would ever touch that water. He would probably die before drinking that water. But obviously, you know, this whole question, this whole thing that, you know, could have been, just ended up not really being a thing, because then it started to rain, right? So that whole, like, them being stressed out about all of that, it starts to rain, and it's almost like they got a bunch of clarity on this situation now. Like, now they don't have to rely on this water right here in front of them. You know, at least they have some time anyways. And so they don't have to drink the water, and they don't drink the water. They collect all the rainwater, and they're drinking the rainwater and all of that really quick. And eventually the storm gets really, really bad. Like, we see thunderstorms, and I remember this. Thunderstorms on The Walking Dead are just incredible. I love thunderstorms. Personally, for me, it's something that is just so, so relaxing. And so as soon as I saw that there, I was like, oh, this is like the perfect episode to watch right now. And so Daryl takes him to the barn that he saw earlier, and Maggie, as soon as she entered the barn, like, I really like these little moments here. Like, again, it's stuff that I forgot that ever happened. But Maggie enters the barn, and she's looking around and she's reminded of her father. She sees a Bible. She finds a walker and she's actually able to put it down. So that was sort of a nod to what happened earlier in the episode when she couldn't do that. You know, she's starting to have some belief right now. But yeah, she's reminded of her father. And I was just like, wow, that's actually a really cool reference right there. Carol tells Rick, and this is like at nighttime now, you know, they're all around the fire, and Carol tells Rick Carl's going to be okay. And Rick says he used to feel sorry for kids just growing up like this. Like, you don't get to experience what we had, and you know, you have to grow up this way. And he was wrong. Like, he says that, you know, I was wrong about that. I was wrong thinking that, because growing up is getting used to the world. And it's easier for them because this is sort of all they know. And that is something that, for me personally, is something that I really am learning myself as well. Like, in terms of just life in general, with like the way I grew up and the way like I'm raising my kids, it's like you really do, like, you're used to what you know growing up. And when you're older and having to adapt to, you know, different things is much harder because you're so used to certain things, and you almost feel it a lot more. And that's the whole point. Like, if you're able to adapt very, very well, I mean, that's the whole part of growing up, right? It's just a lot of confidence in yourself and whatnot, and just sort of being able to adapt to a lot of it. But when you're younger, you don't really notice a lot of that, and it's just sort of, that's just the world that you know. It's just what you know. And so I love that line, because Rick's right about that. Like, it is just easier for them. Daryl does get upset about this. Actually, first, before that, Rick tells a story about his grandfather, and I thought this was really cool. I forgot this line was actually in this episode. And yeah, he tells a story about, you know, wondering whether or not his grandfather killed anyone in the war. And then he says his iconic line, like, this is how we survive. We tell ourselves we are the Walking Dead. And I was just like, oh man, that is such a cool line. And I remember back then thinking it was really cheesy as a line, just because it didn't really, like, I don't know. Again, back then I didn't read the comic, so I didn't really know that it was from the comic. But when it happened, I was like, oh, okay, come on. But looking back at it now, I'm like, I don't know why I ever thought that. It's such a cool line. But Daryl gets really upset by, you know, what Rick was saying or whatever, or at least he just kind of disagrees, or he's just like, whatever. And he just, yeah, he gets up, he says, we ain't them, and then takes off. The storm gets really bad, and then, yeah, Daryl at this point too, I believe, is very curious as to who gave them that water. I think that's why he's looking around still. It's just like, yes, there's a storm and we're hiding out here, but someone dropped off that water. Someone knows we're around here, so I'm just gonna kind of, you know, keep an eye out here. But walkers show up and they're trying to get inside the barn, and so they're all forced to hold the door shut. And I mean, I think there was 2 doors. Honestly, insane scene. I forgot any of this happened here. Like, all the fast cuts, like, they were all having such a hard time holding that door shut. Like, it got to the point where Carl actually had to go and help them. Like, it was such a crazy scene. But eventually, I guess the walkers just stopped because the storm, you know, sort of took care of that whole situation. And yeah, the next morning, Daryl hasn't slept yet. Daryl and Maggie have a really amazing scene there. And obviously, I feel like this is sort of foreshadowing to what happens later on, you know, after Glenn's death and Daryl and Maggie teaming up. Like, really, like, they both have a really special bond. Like, Daryl and Maggie have such a special bond going back to, I guess, Beth's death. Like, I'm trying to think of, you know, if anything happened before that. I'm pretty sure that was really, like, that was the moment that really brought them close together. But Maggie does go outside with Sasha, and then, yeah, we see the storm has killed all of the walkers. Maggie and Sasha talk, and it was a really, you know, just them trying to be hopeful. Like, they were being real about everything, but they were, you know, trying to be hopeful for everything. And that's when Aaron shows up. And I was like, okay, so this, you know, obviously, like, they're about to question him a lot and then eventually go to Alexandria. So I'm interested in that part of the story here, and I can't wait to see, like, just which episode I pick next. It's funny because watching this, I'm more just wanting to stay in this current story and watch the next episode, but I'll have to go and just pick a random episode at some point. I don't know. I'm not sure what I'm going to want to do. I guess however I feel, I'll do that. But I do want to review another episode here in the next couple of days. So stay tuned for that. If you do like all my breakdowns of these earlier episodes, definitely let me know in the comment section below. Make sure to be a subscriber if you want to get all my Walking Dead content like this. And yeah, post your thoughts down below on this episode. And I'll see you guys in the next one.